Hey guys, it's Paul and welcome back to my channel. I've got my bachelor's degree in criminal justice and a minor in psychology, and I'm going to say that for the next 49 videos because I'm just so proud of myself. On top of that, I am a board member for a nonprofit called Voices for the Silenced, and we help getting resources to missing people and their families to help aid in their search. So if you know someone that is missing near or in West Virginia, please get a hold of us and we'll do what we can. And we are here with another talking CJ. And you know that before I started the Lori Vallow trial, I had done a video on the First Amendment, and I figured it is now time to go ahead and continue the series of the amendments. I guess it's a series within a series. I know this one is pretty controversial and I can't touch every single thing that happens with this amendment. I'm going to go over all the fact-based stuff and kind of leave my opinion out of it. So in the comments, I know this can be a heated debate. Please be nice to each other if you want to comment. So let's just get right in. Now we need to start off with the inspiration for the Second Amendment. The English Bill of Rights in 1689 actually had a section in it that resembled the Second Amendment. The English Bill of Rights is known to be very important for history buffs out there, and it helped establish basic civil rights along with talking about how the line of succession of the crown worked. The Second Amendment was also inspired by different states' constitutions. The Pennsylvania Declaration of Rights was written almost 2 decades before the Bill of Rights, and this is what it has to say: that the people have a right to bear arms for the defense of themselves and the state, and as standing armies in the time of peace are dangerous to liberty, they ought not to be kept up, and the military should be kept under strict subordination to and governed by the civil power. Now, the Vermont Constitution was enacted in 1777, and it says, the people have a right to bear arms for the defense of themselves and the state. And the Massachusetts Declaration of Rights was enacted in 1780, and it says, the people have a right to keep and bear arms for the common defense, and as in times of peace, armies are dangerous to liberty, they ought not to be maintained without the consent of the legislature, and the military power shall always be held in an exact subordination to the civil authority and be governed by it. And it was also inspired by the debate between the Federalists and Anti-Federalists at the Constitution Convention. Federalists believed in a strong central government, where Anti-Federalists didn't. They were afraid that a strong central government can cause tyranny and just overall be too powerful. And the Anti-Federalists really wanted to have a way to defend themselves from the government if either of these things happened. Now, the previous U.S. government used the Articles of Confederation, and this established a government that most people assumed was just not strong enough. Under the Articles of Confederation, you couldn't even gather an army federally at all. They just left it up to the states, and clearly that was not something that was going to work forever. And they started working on the Second Amendment as a compromise to be able to have a strong federal government, but also for citizens to be able to defend themselves in case things went sideways. Now, there were several drafts to the Second Amendment. James Madison did show the first initial draft in 1789, and it said, the right of people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, a well-armed and well-regulated militia being the best security of a free country, but no person religiously scrupulous of bearing arms shall be compelled to render military service in person. Now, the second draft was shown to the House of Representatives on August 24th, 1789. and it read, "A well-regulated militia composed of the body of people being the best security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall be compelled to render military service in person." Now then the Senate started looking at the Second Amendment, and they made some changes too. And the Senate did make some modifications on this draft, and that became the Second Amendment. Now the Founding Fathers established the U.S. and started working on the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. By 1775, half Americans already owned guns in their household. They were more common in people's households than things for entertainment were. And quite a few had many guns in the house. They used it to defend their property, they used it to hunt. There were multiple reasons they used guns back in the 1700s. Now, most prominently in the South, when you talk about protecting your property with guns, that unfortunately also meant your slaves. Slave owners were seen to have more guns than just regular residents in these South states, and they used them to keep their slaves from fleeing and also fighting back. The Second Amendment was finally published in late September 1789, and it read, "A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed." And the Bill of Rights, including that Second Amendment, was put in place on December 15th, 1789. The amendments were considered untouchable. You could not make laws that infringed on anybody's amendment rights. Those were basic civil rights of living in America. And it limited the power of the government to make laws to take away anything of those basic civil rights. Now, post-Civil War, the National Guard was really able to start taking up the state protection. And this kind of changed what the Second Amendment meant. At first, it was all about defending yourself against the government or a militia that was trying to come after us. Or it was so you had protection if you needed to go fight for your country. But this started morphing into individual gun rights on whether you're allowed to own, whether you're allowed to carry, whether you're allowed to have on you. For more things like self-defense on civilian instead of military against us. Now in 1865, the South states did pass laws that kind of correlated with the Second Amendment that were known as the Black Code or Black Laws. Now these laws really stopped African Americans from being able to own property, be able to conduct business or own a business, or even buy or lease land. And they just weren't able to go everywhere that anyone that was white could. This was also a time that it spiked that African Americans were being arrested for minor things just to be put in labor. You know, jobs that people didn't want to do that are hard on your body. And these types of laws also restricted African Americans from owning guns. Now there are a few court cases I'm going to weave in here because they are important in the evolution of the Second Amendment. In 1870 they passed the Enforcement Act, and this was to prevent mobs that were ran by just regular citizens such as the KKK, that was trying to stop the African Americans from getting their civil rights from the Constitution. And a terrorist group called the White League ended up trying to do something about this in 1874. They murdered around 100 African Americans who were in the Colfax, Louisiana State House. Now 3 of the members were arrested for violating the 1870 Enforcement Amendment Act, and they were charged from preventing Black Americans from assembling peacefully, exercising their right to vote, and they were trying to reduce the Black Americans' Second Amendment rights to barely anything. Now, in the court case United States against Cruikshank, 1876, they did rule that the Second Amendment was only designed to stop the federal government from infringing on your rights to bear arms when it comes to governmental tyranny, which meant groups like the White League could not be charged in trying to take other citizens' civil rights away, including the Second Amendment. Now, Herman Presser was part of an armed citizen militia in Cook County, Illinois. This militia had ties to the Socialist Labor Party, and this group did protest in 1879. He was found guilty of violating the Illinois state laws on who could form a militia, and it ruled that you couldn't start your own militia. Now, if you were a former member of one that the state of Illinois recognized, the federal government recognized, or something like that, that would be different. But you can't just make your own. But Presser argued back in his court case, Presser versus Illinois, in 1886. He said that the Second Amendment protected his right to form a militia against government tyranny. But the Supreme Court did end up correcting him, saying that the federal government could not limit a well-regulated militia, but the state government could. They reiterated that you could not just form a militia without your state's approval. And now, August 31st, 1911, the Sullivan Act was passed. It was named after the state senator Timothy Sullivan, who wanted to rid New York of guns. There were multiple concerns about the Sullivan Act, and a famous lawman, Bat Masterton, even said that this act was obnoxious, and he questioned Sullivan's mental state when he passed it. And it was rumored that people that were in law enforcement would take advantage of this act in New York. One side argued, you are disarming lawful citizens that mind their own business but just want to feel like they can protect themselves. But the other side thought that he was going to bring in thugs on his payroll and use this as a way to do it. And once this act was passed, it was proven that there was absolutely no reduction in crime at all. But victims were way more in danger in New York because of this, especially for things such as breaking and entering, especially home invasions. Now, on February 14th, 1929 in Chicago, 7 people tied to the mobster George Bugs Moran were gunned down in a parking garage. Most assumed Al Capone had something to do with this, but that has never been actually proven. And around this time is when the conversation really started on people that were in law enforcement or military that had been trained with guns, whether it was reasonable for them to be able to carry other types than normal citizens can. In 1931, the federal government passed the National Firearms Act. Now, this imposed taxes and restrictions on certain kinds of guns, such as machine guns and sawed-off shotguns. That people that were going to own these types of guns or sell them had to be able to register them with the U.S. government. But this let the Treasury Department alert each state on who owned these types of guns and how many. And they said these were usually the types of guns that were in gang crimes, so they were trying to limit those in the city. But this is when the U.S. versus Miller 1939 case came about. Now, in 1934, Jack Miller and someone else was found guilty under the National Firearms Act because he was carrying a sawed-off shotgun across state lines. And the Supreme Court also again ruled that the federal government had the right to rule on what types of guns you could have. Now, something interesting is that in our history, the parties actually used to be switched. The Democrats used to be the ones that were pro-guns, when the Republicans were the ones that were a little weary. And on May 2nd, 1967, around 24 armed members of the Black Panther Party stormed the California state capitol in Sacramento. They were protesting the Mulford bill that Ronald Reagan was signing that day. And the bill said, prohibited the carrying of a loaded firearm on one's person or in a vehicle while in any public place or in any public street in a prohibited area of unincorporated territory, except for specified law enforcement officers, military personnel, bank guards or messengers, sportsmen, private investigators, and patrol operators, and persons authorized to carry concealed weapons. And while he signed it, he did say, there is no reason why on the street today a citizen should be carrying a loaded weapon. Now, when the protesters showed up, Ronald Reagan was actually with a group of 8th graders on the lawn of the Capitol. He was rushed inside to safety, and I'm pretty sure the 8th grade class was too. Now, the state police just ushered them away and took their weapons. The Panthers did argue that they legally could carry those loaded weapons on state property because the bill hadn't been signed in yet until moments ago, and because the weapons were not concealed. There was a shift in 1977 with the NRA and their political agenda. Before the 1977 convention in Cincinnati, the NRA really focused on hunting rights, conservation, and marksmanship. But now they really focus on individual gun ownership rights and narrowing the interpretation of the Second Amendment. Now, in 1986, the Firearm Owner Protection Act was passed. It banned the possession and transfer of new automatic firearms and parts that fire bullets without stopping once the trigger is depressed. It said that the machine guns must be made before May 19th, 1986. And the fine for this could be up to $250,000 and a prison sentence up to 10 years for the possession of an unregistered machine gun. Now, in 1994, we had the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act. Bill Clinton signed this on September 13th, 1994, and there was a subsection on this known as the assault weapon ban. Now, this outlawed the ability for you to own, to make, or even sell a semi-automatic assault weapon. And he mostly was focusing on the military-style weapons such as an AR-15. And it also banned the collection of high-capacity ammunition magazines of more than 10 rounds. And this was a temporary act that expired in 2004. Now, Dick Heller was a DC police officer. He had applied for permission to keep his gun at his home, but the city had enacted a handgun ban that did not allow him to do this. He took this to court in DC versus Heller in 2008, and the court actually ruled in Heller's favor, saying it was a breach on your Second Amendment rights to not allow you to have guns at all. Judge Antonin Scalia had even written that you needed the right to own and possess a gun for any time there would be a confrontation, you would need to protect yourself. There was an agreement that firearms could not be possessed by felons and that you couldn't have firearms in places such as schools or government buildings. And this was a huge moment in the gun rights debate. And even after Heller, there were cities that were trying to stomp on people's Second Amendment rights so there would be no guns in their city. In McDonald versus Chicago 2010, the case showed that the Second Second Amendment should not and could not be limited by state governments. And the Supreme Court also struck down a New York law requiring people to own guns there having to have a license in the court case New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin 2022. And they claimed having a license would make it that the government could easily control who could have guns and who couldn't. And some states do end up having stricter gun laws than others, even though some still argue to this day that any type of regulation on guns is unconstitutional. And we could talk on and on about this amendment. This was the most condensed version I could make. But thank you guys so much for watching. Like and subscribe for me, and hit that notification button. That way you're notified the next time I upload. I still have a GoFundMe going for Crystal Young. If you haven't watched her video yet, you need to. You need to figure out why her mom needs this PI so bad. I also have stickers for sale. They're $2 each, and all proceeds go to the Cold Case Foundation, so it is for a good cause. And thank you guys again so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.